Algeria is rocked by a series of bomb attacks which kill more than 50 people and injure dozens more. It's the deadliest attack in recent years in the country, and the government's blaming Al-Qaeda. So who really is behind the bombings? And is North Africa becoming the new front in the war on terror? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Well, it's been a bloody 24 hours for Algeria. The North African country has been rocked by a series of deadly bomb attacks that have claimed dozens of lives. So far, there's been no claim of responsibility, but the finger of blame is being pointed at groups linked to Al-Qaeda. Shireen Tadros has more.
The first bomb hit a military headquarters. A minute later, another explosion was heard at a nearby hotel, the largest in the town southeast of the capital, Algiers. Most of the dead and wounded were civilians. This attack comes barely 24 hours after an explosion in Bourmed, east of the capital, one of the deadliest explosions the city has seen in years. Tuesday's target was a paramilitary police training school. The attacker drove a car full of explosives into the school's entrance early in the morning. Students were inside waiting to take exams, according to witnesses.
It was a catastrophe. There were applicants queuing up to enter the building for their course when a suicide bomber detonated himself in the middle of all those people.
People died. The house was 100% destroyed. There were wounded people. My sister was wounded, her daughter as well, her husband, and even another family which lives down the road was hurt.
Civilians as well as security officials were among the dozens of victims.
Our position is to combat and confront these terrorist entities. This confrontation will be done by the security services and the national army, as well as every citizen.
In the last 2 years, Algeria has suffered from a wave of attacks, many targeting the country's security apparatus. Earlier this month, a suicide bomber killed 8 people near a Coast Guard's barracks at a beach resort. In December, 2 consecutive bombings in Algiers left more than 40 dead. One of the attacks was at a UN office. 17 UN staff members were killed. Both attacks were claimed by the North African branch of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. The group has links with fighters in other North African countries and is the most effective armed organization in the country. It recently made threats against the Algerian government. Algeria is emerging from more than a decade of conflict that began in 1992 when the military-backed government cancelled elections and Islamic Party was poised to win. About 150,000 people have died during the ensuing violence. In 2005, Algerian President Bouteflika implemented an amnesty to pardon fighters that turned themselves in, one of several attempts to end the violence. This has been one of the bloodiest months in Algeria since the civil war in the 1990s. A new tactic, say experts, is urgently needed. Shireen Tadros for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Rabat. Mustafa El-Khalfi, an expert on Islamic movements at the Mohammed V University in Rabat. In London, Mohammed Al-Arabi Zaytut, he's a former Algerian diplomat. And in Cairo, Dia Rashwan, he's an analyst on political Islam and extremist groups at the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Mustafa El-Khalfi in Rabat, let me start with you. I mean, who do you think was behind the attacks? What sort of message were they trying to send to the Algerian authorities?
It's likely that the North African branch of Al-Qaeda is behind these attacks, taking into account the places in Al-Qabail, taking the organization, the targets, the weapons, all these elements give some evidence that Al-Qaeda is behind these attacks. But we need to wait until Al-Qaeda claim their responsibility to this on these attacks. But behind all this, I think it's a new cycle of terrorism and violence that has started in Algeria now. It's a turning point for the Algerian government that they need to rethink their policy to counter terrorism, their strategy, and their tools to fight against terrorism. The third point, that focusing only on security measures to tackle and to address this problem in Algeria, it failed. The Al-Qaeda in Algeria succeed in adapting with all these security measures, and now is working and very active. Algeria now, it's the 3rd place after Iraq and Afghanistan for Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda in Algeria are using many elements to spread and to widen their activities. For example, that...
I just wanted to bring in Dia Rashwan in Cairo into the discussion. Dia Rashwan, I mean, Mustafa El-Halfi there in Rabat says it's a new cycle of terrorism happening in Algeria, but the Algerian government issued a statement saying that one of the latest attacks was just a small, isolated incident carried out by a small band of terrorists. I mean, now, let's face it, it's much bigger than that, isn't it?
I think we cannot compare what is happening now in Algeria with what happened already in the 90s. In the 90s, we are facing a real civil war. All the parts fighting all the parts. Now we have only one group fighting, trying to attack all the other parts and all the society. Al-Qaeda in Algeria or in the Islamic Maghreb now is the sole group in Algeria fighting and going to arms. All the other Islamic groups, political Islamists, or even former militant Islamists already go to politics. Then the situation is different from 90s to now. What is important in the last days is that Al-Qaeda in Algeria trying to confirm its existence, its presence, its strength by making such attacks, and the tactic of suicide bombings helped Al-Qaeda in Algeria to achieve such targets. And we remember together that in the 90s, all the Algerian militant groups never used these suicide bombings. But now, with this new tactic coming from the original Qaeda in Iraq and the other branches of Al-Qaeda to Algeria, Al-Qaeda in Algeria succeeded to harm and to make mediatic attacks such as this one of yesterday and those of the last days. But we cannot also say that Al-Qaeda is already weakened. We have Al-Qaeda in Algeria strong, but not in all Algeria. All the attacks are in the eastern part of the country, close to the mountains of Al-Qaeda, of the born camp of Al-Qaeda. And in the other side of the country are empty from its influence. Then we are in face real growth of Al-Qaeda in real and certain places, but not in all Algeria. And if we compare Al-Qaeda in Algeria with the other branches of Al-Qaeda, we will discover that Al-Qaeda in Algeria is now the most strong one if we compare it with Al-Qaeda in Iraq or even in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, we'll come back to Al-Qaeda across the Maghreb a little bit later in the programme, but let me bring in Mohammed Zaytut in London. I mean, the Algerian government tried to engage with the Islamist groups through the National Reconciliation Law some years ago, which urged the fighters to lay down their arms and so on. Has that policy failed now?
Completely. It's very simplistic to say Al-Qaeda and it's a fight between government and Al-Qaeda. I think this is very simplistic. Yeah, that's true. It's part of the picture, but it's not the real picture. And in fact, it's more complicated than this very simplistic saying. The reconciliation law was completely a failed project because simply it was a false reconciliation. It wasn't a real reconciliation. The regime was more interested to neutralize those who were in the mountains fighting him with weapons than to really find the reconciliation to what happened since '92. Let's not forget that on the 11th of January '92, handfuls of generals toppled the president and elected president and cancelled a free and fair and democratic election. Islamists won the election, parliamentary election, but the president was from another party, but the handful of generals, particularly the one from the secret services and from the chief of army, decided that the Algerian population is not ready enough for democracy, and therefore they decided to stop the democratic process which was going on Algeria. Since that, we have this problem, because saying that this is Al-Qaeda now and it's only a fight between a government and Al-Qaeda, that's not really correct, because simply these groups existed before the existence of Al-Qaeda itself. These groups these groups existed since '92. Let's not forget that, and that's very important.
Okay.